are asked here to factor each polynomial by grouping. So if we've mastered the concept of factoring by the greatest common factor, then grouping shouldn't be much of an issue. So what we do here, since it is called grouping, remember that this works only when we have 4 terms. So how many terms do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4. So perfect. It's set up nicely for us. Now, the name grouping implies that we're going to be creating some groups. So the first thing to do, draw sets of parentheses around each of these. Okay, so we'll only do one example at a time, but I want you to see that the grouping requires us to make 2 groups from each of the sets. Okay, so now all we're going to do first is we're going to look at each of the 2 groups, and we're going to pull out something that each of the terms has in common. So for right now, just look at this x cubed and the 7x squared. So we're only going to look at that one for right now. So from x cubed and 7x squared, what is the greatest common factor that you can pull out? Well, we know that we have a 1 in front of the x cubed and a 7 in front of the x squared. We cannot pull out a number since 1 and 7, the greatest common factor there is 1, so we're not going to pull out anything there, but we notice there's x terms present in both. So the rule that we mentioned previously was that we'll pull out the x term with the smallest power, and in this case it's x squared. So I'm going to pull out an x squared, leaving me inside with an x, since x squared times x will give me x cubed, and also with a 7, since x squared times 7 gives me 7x squared. Now, looking at the second group, I've got this plus 3x plus 21. So now I notice that there's only one x term present, so I cannot pull out an x. But I can, however, pull out a 3, since 3 is the greatest common factor for 3 and 21. So I'm going to pull out a positive 3, leaving me inside with x, since 3 times x is 3x, and 7, since 3 times 7 is 21. Now, in order for this to work, for the grouping to work rather, we need to be sure that these 2 things here that we are left with match. And in this case, they do. So now that we've set this up, it's very simple to see that we can factor this by doing the following. Well, we know that x plus 7 and x plus 7 are the 2 things that it has in common. So I have my x plus 7 right here. Now, the things that are being multiplied by them are this x squared and the plus 3. So I'm going to bring that together in its own little group here. So here's x squared plus 3. So I have factored it now using the method of grouping. So my answer is simply this right here. Okay? So hopefully it was clear why this occurred. So let's take a look at the next example, and it should work out pretty much the same way. So again, I've created my groups, and then I'm going to factor out from each of the groups the greatest common factor. So I look here, I've got 4x cubed minus 6x squared. Well, I know for 4 and 6, the greatest common factor there is going to be a 2. And I know that both have x terms in them. So I'm going to pull out the x term with the smallest power. In this case, x squared. So here's my x squared. Now the question becomes 2x squared times what will give me 4x cubed? Well, I know that 2 times 2 is 4, and x squared times x gives me x cubed, so this should be a 2x. Alright, minus, since we've got our minus sign here, well, 2 times 3 gives me 6, so I'm going to have a 3 there. And of course, the x squared term is already there, so I don't need to rewrite an x term. So I have 2x minus 3 there. Now, looking at the next group, I have a minus 6x plus 9. Well, I know the greatest common factor for 6 and 9 happens to be 3. And in this case, I'm going to pull out a negative 3 here, since I want to be left with a positive 2x on the inside. So here's my minus 3 and my 2x. Since negative 3 times 2x gives me this minus 6x. And then I need a minus 3 so that it'll match. So minus 3, of course, times minus 3 gives me that positive 9. So now I notice here that both of these two things here that I pulled out that are left inside the parentheses happen to match. So good. I've done my grouping correctly then. Now all I need to do is rewrite. So I have my 2x minus 3 off here to the side times whatever was pulled out. Well, 2x squared from the first group and then minus 3 from the second group. So I have factored the second polynomial again using the method of grouping.